CR. Let's call roll.
Representative Campbell,
Here.
Representative Connolly,
Here.
Representative Harshman,
Excused.
Representative Jarvis,
Here.
Representative Provenza,
Here.
Representative Storer, Representative Thayer, Representative Worf,
Here.
Chairman Byron.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. We are taking up Senate File 4, which was an interim bill through the last TRW interim summer. With that, I'll invite State Parks up here. A little bit out of tradition to not have one of us present the bill, but these folks are the experts, and we worked pretty hard on this bill through the interim, and I think it's in a great spot. So welcome to House TRW, and for Zoom land and the rest of us, introduce yourselves and have at it.
Good morning, or good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Nick Nealon, Deputy Director with State Parks and Cultural Resources. And if you like, we'll have Mark walk the bill after we talk about it a little bit first, if that's all right.
Please.
I feel like I'm really loud here, sorry. So we have 25 seasonal rangers that we hire every year to go along with our 5 full-time law enforcement rangers. Every ranger that we have in our system is a post-certified commissioned ranger, law enforcement officer, just like every other law enforcement officer in the state. These folks could leave our system and go to work for any other agency without skipping a beat. We take great pride in the professionalism of our organization. We spend a lot of money on training and equipment. Our goal is to have the best equipped, best trained park ranger force in the country, and to be on par with the same with any law enforcement agency in Wyoming. This bill allows our rangers to do things that other law enforcement folks around the state already do, while at the same time not giving us statewide authority to act. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mark Coughlin, who's our Chief Ranger, who will talk a little bit more detail about the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Coughlin. Please.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Coughlin. I'm the Chief Law Enforcement Ranger for Wyoming State Parks and Cultural Resources. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee, for allowing us to speak today on behalf of this bill. A little bit about my background. I'm almost 30 years in a natural resource professional as a park ranger. I spent 27 of those years in another state managing a very large district for 20 years, very similar to our parks that we have here, water-based recreation, trails, urban interface, backcountry, front country, boating, a lot of things we see here. So that's kind of a little bit of my history. As Deputy Director Nealon said, this is to help primarily, the function of this bill is to promote better public safety in the state of Wyoming. That is the intent of this bill. And I'll go a little bit into it. Our primary job, as Deputy Director Nealon said, is public safety and law enforcement. When you think about what park rangers do, we do quite a few things, but our primary job is law enforcement. For example, we do a lot of public safety, including ice rescue. We had a double fatality on Saturday at Glendo State Park, and our rangers were the primary responders and took a large role in that recovery effort up there and organized that effort. We also do backcountry patrol, front country patrol, fire protection, all the myriad of things you think somebody wearing a Smokey Bear hat would do. But primarily is public safety and law enforcement is our primary job. As we say, we're all post-certified peace officers. Just like any other peace officer in the state of Wyoming, we're required to go through the same Wyoming Academy. We're required to keep the same training hours as any other officer of the state. We typically exceed those by about 3 times what the state requires on an annual basis. Just because of the amount of training in the areas that we cover and how remote we are, we have more training to help us do our job better. We have large areas. If you think about Glendo State Park, for example, on a weekend day, we have 30,000 people inside the park. That's one of the largest population areas in the state of Wyoming at that time. And our sole responsibility is for public safety and law enforcement in those areas. And that's a large function in any of our state parks. And of course, if we have some other mission come up, like we said, a drowning or whatever it may be, you know, we're typically the primary resource to start that function until we get other resources to help us out. Again, this bill does not give us statewide authority. I'll say it one more time, it does not give us statewide authority. What it allows us to do is to help out other law enforcement agencies around our areas. For example, if we're called to assist by another law enforcement agency, we're able to do that. There's a couple of sheriffs here that'll speak on that and kind of how that works and how we helped out in the past. It also allows us to respond to people who commit a crime inside of our parks, then flee our parks. It's called fresh pursuit in law. And the way that works is 2 summers ago, we had someone try to run over one of our park rangers, intentionally try to run him over. Person was intoxicated, had warrants. Our ranger had to get out of the way. Thankfully, got out of the way safely. He pursued that individual to the end of our park, which was Boise State Park. We had to terminate the pursuit. We're the only law enforcement agency in the state that has to do that. We're not covered in that. We're excluded from doing that. We'll talk more about that in the bill. Thankfully, our ranger was able to call Thermopolis PD and the sheriff's department, and he was found north of Thermopolis in a field, and they were able to find him and take him into custody. Another way that happens if this bill allows us to respond to felonies or serious crimes that occur in our presence. I think it's the expectation of the citizens of Wyoming and you all as well, that if someone commits a major crime and in the presence of a peace officer, that we act to prevent that from getting worse and hold them until the local authority, if they wish to help, or they could give it to us to act. And I think that's what helps as well. The way this looks in real life is one of our rangers about a year ago at Kirk County State Park, which is 25 miles to our west, was heading into town for a meeting. About halfway between the park and town, there's an individual driving, weaving in and out of traffic and causing traffic hazard. Looked like they were impaired. They were heading towards a school area and a restaurant area in a big curve there on Happy Jack Road. He was trying to get hold of Highway Patrol to get authority to pull him over, to get a hold of somebody. So he had to make that big decision. For public safety, do I stop this vehicle or not? So he stopped the vehicle. Of course, the person was impaired, got a hold of Highway Patrol. They were able to take the person into custody, and they were charged for that. So those things in this bill, as we're trying to do, is how do we better help public safety and not give us any more authority than a normal police officer, but how do we just get the normal authority to kind of help us out a little bit? Another way this came to pass this last summer, if you all know where Fort Bridger State Park is, out by Evanston. On Saturday, right after the event, right at 5 o'clock as that event was ending, there was a homicide 2 blocks away from the park. And someone was shot several times in the chest and killed. When those things come out, the radio traffic is hectic. A lot of people didn't know what was going on. Our guys saw an ambulance speeding by and they're trying to figure out what's going on. They were able to get a hold of somebody, figure out there was a shooting. They were one of the first officers on scene to protect that ambulance crew and public safety. And then they were able to go help apprehend and arrest that person who committed the shooting. So those types of things that we kind of get involved in. As you can imagine, some of our parks are large. They're over 40,000 acres. We may go through 3 jurisdictions just to get from one side of a park to another side of the park. Again, this is just to serve better public safety in our state. That's what the intent is. This bill, again, is supported by the sheriffs and chiefs. There'll be a few here to speak. I will not speak on their behalf, but they're speaking for us. And I think a lot of times when people come to you with bills, there's winners and losers on these bills, and there's some kind of financial responsibility. In my mind, there's no losers here in this bill. This just helps public safety. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I remember this bill when I served on judiciary, and then I believe it came last year. And so I'm wondering, and it looks different from the bill that we had last year. So I'm wondering if you could give us just some background on that as well.
Mr. Chair,
Please.
Representative Provenza. The major difference here is most state parks that have a law enforcement agency have statewide jurisdiction because their parks are spread out throughout the state. They travel a lot. When this went to the Senate side, they realized that they prefer not to give us statewide jurisdiction, to keep this where it is now, where it treats us like the rest of the police officers in the state.
Thank you for that. Representative Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kind of, I guess, a question regarding something our deputy director said, and I just want to clarify that this bill will enable you guys to do everything our peace officers can do. So I'm assuming you could stop me for not wearing a seatbelt or stop me from speeding well, that's true, it's a secondary. Or, I mean, pick a random thing, right, that peace officers can do. So if you would just maybe clarify some of those limitations, what you can and cannot do?
Mr. Chair, Representative Campbell. That's a great question. This still does not give us authority outside of our parks unless those three things are met. It's fresh pursuit. It is something that if felony is happening in our presence or requested by another agency. It does not give us the authority to do targeted patrol. We can't do traffic enforcement. We can't do drug interdiction, other things like that.
Mr. Chairman, if I could add to that, we've drafted internal policies and procedures for our rangers that clarify all these things as well, and very specifically say, if this bill passes, you can do these things, you cannot do these things. So there will be no speed traps and seatbelt tickets and things like that.
Thank you, Representative Thayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Deputy Director, and thank you for your service. The last statement you made, like on drugs and all that stuff, but if you were asked, you were saying there's 3 points. If you were asked to assist on those, you could.
Representative Byron, Representative Thayer. Yes, we could. If we're requested by another agency to help, then we could, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Worf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Why don't you have this authority already?
Either of you, please.
Mr. Chair, Representative Worf. This legislation was drafted back in 1991. So I'm unaware why that is, why we'd be particularly excluded from having that authority. I don't know why that is.
Please follow up.
Because I guess that's my biggest question. Is this appears to be an expansion of authority, even though it sounds like our rangers are aptly qualified and trained. This does sound like it's an expansion of authority. And I guess that's one of I always have concerns when we're expanding authorities. Sometimes it has a tendency of being abused. And I guess that's probably my biggest concern about this is I know sometimes when we grant extended authority, sometimes that morphs into things that we're maybe not aware of. But I guess that's my biggest concern. And I do want to thank you for helping in my county. I know we'll hear some testimony, but I do know when called upon, you guys have responded and acted. And I guess that's just what I'm trying to decide and understand is why we haven't given this in the past. It appears that you've been getting all the training and stuff. We just haven't basically given you that authority.
Thank you, Representative. And I mean, I think I can lead that into a question, Mr. Coughlin. Can you tell us about, and I have a specific example, but I'd rather hear from you, about a normal day that one of your rangers that maybe is patrolling in Boyson, how many miles they might put on the rig and what their day may look like if they're covering their entire area?
Mr. Chairman, I have a typical day for a ranger up at Boyson State Park. They'll probably put anywhere between 50 to 100 miles a day on their vehicles. Like most of our parks, they're very large reservoir-based parks. That particular park is over 40,000 acres, 20,000 acres of water and over 20,000 acres of land. So they go through 3 jurisdictions when they're working. One of the reasons we get requested so much by their law enforcement agencies is because the counties are so large. If you take Carbon County, for example, there might be a deputy down in Baggs. There might be a deputy at the jail in town. Well, call comes out somewhere near Seminole State Park. There's no one to help for literally miles. And that's not uncommon in any of our counties that we work in. I mean, any given time, there might be 2 deputies out on the street in a county. So as you imagine, it's pretty spread out pretty thin. Our counties in Wyoming are very large, and they just don't have the staffing to help out.
Appreciate that. Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question, would this cost the agency some funding to move to being able to have this authority? And the other question is, as far as your radio comms and things like that, are you all pretty well set up for your communications with other law enforcement agencies, or would there have to be some additional? work on that?
Mr. Coughlin.
Mr. Chair, Representative Connolly, great questions. These would happen in the normal course of our rangers' duties when they're out there, so there would not be any other costs associated with that. As far as radio communication, we're hooked up with the state system, which is Salix, which we could talk to, in our bank of radios, we're specifically set up to talk to every law enforcement, not only law enforcement agencies, but game and fish, at local sheriff's departments, local police departments. We have that radio capability now.
Thank you. Representative Jarvis. Wow, we got Representative Story, get a question ready.
Thank you, Chairman. I just have a quick question on the discovery of the commission of a felony which was observed. What does that mean?
And Mr. Chair,
Please.
Representative Jarvis, I think that's a great question. Let's say when we're doing the normal course of our job duties, we're outside of a park, if a felony were to occur at any type of felony, whatever it may be, a drug deal, you pick any felony you like, we have the duty to intervene and stop that. Again, we think that's the expectation of the citizens of Wyoming, and quite frankly, all you as well. So if a major crime occurs in our presence, we could stop and intervene and figure out what's going on.
Thank you, Representative Story.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wouldn't want to disappoint. Deputy Director, good to see you. Thank you for being here, Mr. Coughlin. I remember we had lots of discussion on this bill in the interim, and it's great to hopefully see it get across the finish line. I was just tracking the amendments that were discussed on the other side of the building. It looks like there were some insertions and then they were taken out by the same senator. I'm just trying to understand kind of what their thinking was, having to do with the inclusion, I think, of the intoxicated 31.5-233. Anyway, just maybe enlighten me on that one.
Yeah,
Please.
Mr. Chair,
Please.
Representative Story, it's a great question. You know, some of the devil's in the detail in some of these statutes, and I think when they made the first change, there were some statutes that were a lot, the fine print was lost, so they just tried to make that correction.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at the Senate amendments, and it looks like the word "or" was not included on the second reading amendment. So, and that's I guess this was the previous bill, page 2, line 8. But if you don't have the word "or," then it could really just tighten what you can do.
Thank you for that clarification. Any comment on that, or are we good to go to other folks? Thank you. I know you won't go far, but please, Deputy Director.
Mr. Chairman, would you like Mark to go through the bill and outline the specific changes, or are you good as is?
I will leave that to my committee. I mean, Representative Story and I worked this through the committee. I feel comfortable with it, but I certainly, Representative Provenza, please.
Just real quick question, sorry, Mr. Chairman. Does this change anything with like pensions? Because I mean, you're already peace officers, I guess, and then you're state employees.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, no, that was taken care of in previous year's legislation.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I leave it to the committee. I mean, they've been doing their homework, so I appreciate that, and I think we have, if there's any specific questions, we can ask you back up, but I think at this time, unless someone would like a line by line, we can hop to other electeds, which some are sitting in this room, also called sheriffs, but please be first to, part of House District 22 sheriff is also here, which is awesome, but yeah, come on up, introduce yourselves. Welcome to House TRW. Thanks for coming so far.
Chairman, committee, thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak. I'll be brief. I'm Sheriff Andy Kopp of Uintah County. Looking through this bill and speaking with the chief throughout the months, the way it's written now, I think is a valuable asset not only to the state but local law enforcement. They're not asking for authority that gives them statewide authority. However, with the fresh pursuit example, if someone were to run from them and they reach their their end of the line, we may not have a deputy or a state trooper in the area to pick that up, and we eventually lose that individual. From experience dealing with the state parks police, we host the Fort Bridger Rendezvous down in Fort Bridger. It's one of the largest events at a state park, if not the largest. They send about 4 or 5 rangers and people down to help us. We did have a homicide last year down there right around closing time, and we had our deputy was in another town, Mountain View or Lyman at the time. So we had our guys down there on horses in the state park police, and without them and our guys on the horses, it could have got out of hand. So they're always willing to help, you know, and I think the way this is written, it's I personally would be in support of it and ask you guys as well to please support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Any questions of Sheriff Kopp from Uinta County? Thank you for that. Please introduce yourself. Welcome from my home county, part of my home county, and welcome to House TRW.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Sheriff Shane Johnson from Lincoln County, Wyoming. Just here to, again, I'll be really brief as well, just here to voice my support for this. I think it was brought up a little bit earlier, why it wasn't done earlier. It's a good question. I think the fact that the solid leadership in that organization at this time is part of the reason why it's being brought up now. And so that makes a huge difference, I think. We're rural. We rely on each other in the law enforcement realm. And so having those extra people out there, the full-time and seasonal, being able to help us makes a big difference. I also want to say our WASCOP director, Alan Thompson, was here, but has to get something else going, waiting for a bunch of chiefs and sheriffs to show up to his instructions, so he had to leave earlier, but wanted to voice his support.
Thank you, Sheriff Johnson. Thank you for coming up from Lincoln County. I have a question for either of you. You know, you hit on it a little bit, Sheriff Johnson, about well, we all know this rural aspect of Wyoming, and especially for your department, in my neck of the woods, very spread out north-south, not so much east-west, but north-south. So, you know, for either of you, you know, I think it's always great to have more opportunity, and you had a great real-world example of a tragedy that happened just last year. But do you see this, you know, eliminating some of those barriers when you do have to make a few extra radio calls or phone calls when a situation arises? I mean, is it, do you traditionally have such good working relationships, or does it strengthen that working relationship with our rangers? Either of you, please.
Chairman, both. We do have excellent working relationships, but it also does streamline it. It takes away any question of, am I out of my wheelhouse at this point, or am I got the green light to help? And that's what we want to remove, is those barriers.
Appreciate that. Committee, any other questions of our great local sheriffs? Thank you. Anything else to add? Great. Appreciate it. Thank you for coming all this way. Anyone else elected in the room? Okay, we'll go ahead and pivot to public comment. Anyone from the public want to chat with us about Senate File 4? File 4, having none online, correct? Still none online, all right? All right, seeing no one jumping up into our wonderful empty black chairs, I will close public comment. Committee, what is your pleasure? Moved by Representative Worf, seconded by Representative Campbell. Let's go ahead, and I think it is worth noting, you know, blue file that we did work through the interim. Certainly want to consider any amendments from the eyes of this good committee, but do we have any on page 1, page 2, 3, 4, 5? You can kind of work through it. I'm going to make a quick comment. You know, as a first responder, I think it's really important to note that we do live in a rural state, and this is a bill that we talked about. If anyone has an opportunity to do a ride along with our rangers, we got to do that at a meeting in Casper and just discuss the miles they're traveling. And I just think this really is a great opportunity to not only give them an extra little bit of support, and certainly got worked over on the Senate side, but from the good testimony of the sheriffs, it's something that they are comfortable with and actually would prefer, you know, real world example. And the idea of having to leave a jurisdictional line and make a call to provide help is pretty cumbersome, and we need to get kind of brought up into 2025. So with that, any other comments, committee, on Senate File 4? Please, Representative Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question, because I had those same, are we expanding authority concerns? So have reached out and talked to a lot of folks, I mean, from wardens to rangers to, you know, our peace officers. And I think what's unique and cool about this bill is they want to help. Let's give them the ability to help, which I think is absolutely fantastic. Here are the situations where we could be of use and better serve the public. So let's give them the green light and the ability to do that.
Appreciate that, Representative Campbell. Any other comments? Representative Connolly.
I just have one. I like the idea that it will be effective immediately. I think we'll be able to have some good support this summer, and so I'm happy about that as well.
Great, thank you. Committee? Question being called. This will be a roll call vote for Senate File 4.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote for Senate File 4 engrossed. Representative Campbell.
Aye.
Representative Connolly.
Aye.
Representative Harshman.
Excused.
Representative Jarvis.
Aye.
Representative Provenza.
Aye.
Representative Storer.
Aye.
Representative Thayer.
Aye.
Representative Worf.
Aye.
Chairman Byron.
Aye.
Chairman, there are 8 aye, 1 excused.
Thank you, and committee, you guys can chat afterwards. Who wants to carry that on the floor here in the next few days? We're going to hop right over to Senate File 179 and welcome our good colleague from down the aisle, Senator Barlow. Thank you for coming in front of House TRW again. Great to see you last week, great to see you this week. Walk us through Senate File 179.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good morning or afternoon. Great to see you all. I'm pleased to bring before you Senate File 179, sage grouse compensatory mitigation amendments. Mr. Chairman, just I guess to have maybe a little more information, I want to take us back to 2007. That's when sage grouse became a concern in the state of Wyoming about the potential listing, endangered species listing of sage grouse. And as you can imagine, that would have a profound effect in Wyoming as far as mining, including oil and gas production, agriculture, etc. So at that time, then Governor Friedenthal put together a sage grouse implementation team and executed an executive order. And that executive order and that work was to try to put Wyoming in the driver's seat with Wyoming's wildlife, i.e. sage grouse is Wyoming's wildlife, and prevent the potential listing of the greater sage grouse in Wyoming and more broadly across the 6 states where sage grouse is native habitat for sage grouse. So, excuse me, Mr. Chairman. So 2007, this started initiated. And some of the same folks who are doing the work then are doing the work now, including Mr. Budd. Bob, I don't know, I didn't see when I came in if he was here or not, but he is great. And what we did, we went through that, and each successive governor, Governor Friedenthal, then Governor Meade, and now Governor Gordon, have used the executive order to continue to try to, one, not just say we're doing it, but actually demonstrate we can conserve habitat and sage grouse, do it correctly, and stave off the potential of a listing. So that's where we are. In 2015, the legislature adopted statute, and this is 919, 101, et cetera, and 201, et cetera, which this amends that second piece. The first part of that statute is the codification of the sage grouse implementation team, which is a diverse group of stakeholders that come together, meet multiple times a year, make recommendations to the governor regarding actions that could be taken responding to federal inquiries, et cetera. Excuse me. And then give advice to the governor on the executive order. There is currently an executive order in place, and that's their role. The second part of the statute that was adopted in 2015 sets up a mitigation program. And this program is, and first of all, compensatory mitigation. There's a lot of definitions, and I don't have my green book with me, but basically our goals with sage grouse are to avoid disturbing them, minimize disturbance. And if you can't do those first two, then there's a mechanism to gain credits and to basically offset. You're gonna have some interference here, some disturbance here. We're gonna offset it by in another spot. So that's the credit. And right now, that system is a system that there is a large landowner in center part of the state, Pathfinder Ranch, who has gone through the process with the Fish and Wildlife Service and the state of Wyoming. State Land Board, of course, is in charge of this. It's not just the governor, but that part of it, the State Land Board is involved in. And they have established that as a credit bank, if you will. So an entity in Northeast Wyoming can't avoid, can't mitigate, or can't avoid, can't minimize, and they have to disturb some part of the grouse habitat, then they can go buy some credits, some compensation credits from this bank, and that will, then they'll be able to move forward with whatever their disturbance is. What the current statute, and I'll just take you into the bill, Mr. Chairman, if that's appropriate. What the current bill articulates and anticipates, but does not actually go very far in defining, is that an operator, someone who can avoid or can't minimize, can do something about it right close by. Right now, the system is you got to do it with the conservation bank. What this bill does is say, no, in fact, an operator can go to an adjacent landowner or down the stream bed or whatever, and come up with a mitigation in that area, in the same area. And so what this bill does is simply clarify that is a possibility. So why did I bring the bill? Well, 2 years ago, new challenge, sage grouse is getting looked at again. There's a new order being considered, and my community, my area, and so I probably should have declared a conflict, but I'm a much larger group, was considered for core area. Core area has limitations on how development can occur. And it can be significant. Now, why is our core area, our proposed core area different than others? Ours is 80+% private land. Everywhere else in the state, it is 80+% other people. I mean, government lands, federal or state lands. So that's why you can imagine the community members in my community, my neighbors, and I said, whoa, wait a minute, we got to come up with another approach here. And in talking with all the different stakeholders, and many of them, of course, are energy companies, they are the ones that would have to deal with this issue. The one thing we'd like to have is a way to actually do mitigation in the area. And I have landowners that have wind leases, landowners that have oil and gas, et cetera, and then there's others that don't. Well, why can't we use, in the community mitigation? So that's what this bill does. It just lays that out. So as you'll see on the bottom of page 218, this new language, I should say on 14, this is current language, including operator offered measures, current statute. And then we added operator offered restoration credits. Just to be clear that the operator can actually do this, basically, I'm not going to say it's in-house, but it's in the neighborhood. That's what we're talking about. So then you go to the part below and you just line out, yep, we can do this, we can do it, the operators can do it right there, they can do it in the neighborhood, they don't have to go through that credit system, the broader, more formal credit system. Going over to page 3, here's a couple of things that are important. The current, this is lines 2 and 3, 1, 2, 3. Actually, maybe this whole section. The current system, once they've bought the credits, they have to maintain them for as long as the disturbance is occurring with that mitigation credit. So that has to be maintained. Well, if we're going to have an alternate system, they also are responsible for maintaining it. So this time the operator is responsible, not the credit provider. The other system, that once they buy that credit, then the provider is responsible. In this system, the operator stays responsible because they're not going through that formal bank. The second part of this one is the delegation of the responsibility. That it maintains, through whether they change hands, the company changes hands, whatever, that is maintained. That responsibility is maintained. And this is us demonstrating to those who may want to ask for the listing of the bird, that no, we have continuity in this. We have continuity in this. And the final thing, Mr. Chairman, on line 8, 9, 10, and this is just me. I got interested in public policy because of the private property rights. The Mineral Leasing Act of 1920 says basically on federal minerals, you can use the reasonably necessary use of the surface. If we're saying this is to mitigate disturbance, I don't want this eminent domain to be used in this manner. I think that's outside of reasonable use of the surface on someone else's land, particularly private land. So I'm not saying it's the most important thing in the bill, but it's the most important thing in my life. No, I'm just kidding, Mr. Chairman. I think it is meaningful in the context of how this can now be used in other places potentially. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd be glad to stand for questions. If I left anything out or anyone has any concerns, please, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Barlow. Representative Jarvis, please.
Senator Barlow, thank you, Chairman. I was getting the senator correct this time around. So when you say in-house mitigation and the continued measures under that, what does that look like?
Mr. Chairman, in-house may not be the right term, but in-house meaning the company is responsible for it. In the neighborhood is, the proximity issue. So as it currently is, if someone buys mitigation credit, and I've not gone through this process formally, personally, so there'll be others rooms that can maybe give more detail. My understanding of the process is you can't avoid, right? You can't minimize. So now you have to go through this process, and some state agency is telling you you're going to have to do something. And that credit, I'll pick a number out. I think it's $78,000 for a particular oil well in Crook County. That's what they've got to mitigate. So they go buy a credit from the provider and say, all right, for $78,000, you're taking on our responsibility. Without that mechanism, then we have to have a mechanism where the operator is responsible for that. So that's monitoring, that's all the different things that the state board will come up with. And there are rules, there are current rules in place. I think they're going to have to be modified a little bit for this to take this on specifically. But there are rules that the State Board of Land Commissioners has outlined, okay, this is what the provider has to do. And if we're going to do it in-house, in the community, in the neighborhood, this is what's responsible for. And I think it'll include monitoring and all those different things that still have to be done over there. But now it's going to be the operator's responsibility, not that third-party provider. I hope that's helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Jarvis, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it was that there was a committee or a commission or someone helping create that plan on what that looked like, that it wasn't just an agreement between two neighbors.
Mr. Chairman, if I could.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize. First of all, we have the CIGIT, right? Sage Grouse Implementation Team. They're giving advice to the Board of Land Commissioners. The Board of Land Commissioners is adopting rules, and they will, I believe, I've gone through the current rules, and the reason I brought this bill is because I think it's pretty hard for an operator to do this now under the current rules. I think there's going to have to be some modification to accommodate for just what you're talking about. And I think this opens that path. It's my hope. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Thayer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Barlow, I think this is a win-win, like you said, for wildlife and for property owners and for industry. We're same kind of line of questioning. The Board of Land Commissioners will promulgate all these rules. Are they good with the capacity of doing all this new scope of work?
Well, Mr. Chairman, we're the legislative branch. We just ask them to get things done. And they don't. Mr. Chairman, look, there are already rules in place. I think we're talking about some relatively precise but meaningful modifications to the current rules. And they do it, and they've been doing it now for almost 10 years since the legislation was originally passed. So I think, and Mr. Budd and others can speak to it. I think there are adjustments every so often anyway in the rules. I don't know the history of it, but I know there are there are adjustments in rules. So I think that it's very doable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you, and they have been monitoring in the past since this took place, so, okay, thank you.
Thank you. It's great to see Senator crack a joke that the House laughs at. Anyone else? Oh, Representative Provenza, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, it's not in here and maybe it's later down in the statute, but I guess, you know, in changing this system or the structure, my question is how do we test the effectiveness of the mitigation? Because I think we can say that mitigation is happening, but I want to make sure that it actually works for the sage grouse and it's not us rubber stamping what we're doing that might actually be harming sage grouse.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Absolutely, and that's what the rules process will help do. Actually, all of this is actually already in rules. What there isn't is a mechanism to actually do this alternate provision, if you will. Right now, we have it for the current system. What we need is the clarity, how it can be done for this type of operator-offered measures. So I don't want a lower standard. Let's be clear. I have no interest in a lower standard or jeopardizing the grouse or the habitat, et cetera. I want it to be just as robust. I just want it to be an option, a meaningful option for other places, other folks to participate in this without going through the Fish and Wildlife Service and all that other process. I'll say it this way. If the grouse in my community are being impacted, I just assume we do something to mitigate those impacts in my community, if it's possible, and for it to be meaningful. That's what we're doing. Right now, the grouse in my community, if there's a mitigation needed, they're not being benefited at all. That benefit is going somewhere else. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Wharf, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing, Senator Barlow, what we're talking about is like offsite mitigation. What my thought keeps coming back to, and I'm hopeful that the rules, when they come up with the rules, because I've dealt with this in the past, and I know usually when you do offsite mitigation, it's because you're having an impact locally. And when you're done with that impact, I'm assuming that they'll put it back as close as they can back to productive sage grouse habitat. So I'm assuming that that's something that will be captured in the rules, is not only will they be mitigating offsite, but when they're done with their disturbances, that there will be mitigation done to the disturbed site where the operator is.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I believe that is part of the current expectation. And as like I said, the hierarchy is avoid the disturbance, minimize it, and then if you can't do either of those, then you've got to mitigate it in some way, compensatory mitigation, and there's this process. This is just saying, hey, that could actually take place not 150 miles away, but maybe next door, and we're going to figure out a way to accommodate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Barlow. Appreciate that. With that, we are going to a few agency heads in the room, and certainly would invite them up to come comment on Senate File 179. I thought we scared them away. Oh, I was like, what did we do?
That's kind of his mic drop.
Yeah, exactly. Please join us. Welcome, great familiar faces. To comment on Senate File 179. Well, Director Budd, you're first to the mic and you've gone green, so go for it.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Bob Budd. I'm the director or the chairman of the Sage Grouse implementation team and have been in that capacity since we started it in 2007. Speaking in favor of the bill just simply clarifies what we've been trying to do now for almost 20 years. There are a few, as Senator Barlow said, areas in there where there's a little unclear, or people aren't quite sure how to do it. Certainly this, I think, helps clarify that process. Just to back up and answer a couple of the questions that came up, in any analysis of any activity, the avoid, minimize, and mitigate hierarchy is always placed first. Usually we're dealing with an avoidance that's happened, minimization that's happened, and a residual effect that might be there that needs to be mitigated. So it's not like you can just go in and do whatever you want and then, and mitigate it. This really is important in Northeast Wyoming because it allows us to do that on that landscape that's almost totally private land, where you have willing landowners, habitat providers, and you have the ability to continue that development. So it's a very good bill as far as clarifying. I don't think it will take it'll be a surgical approach when you look at any rules changes. Most of those rules are in place, as the statute directs a lot of that. But the rules go through what has to be there in order to meet the bar of compensatory mitigation. That bar is set so that if the bird ever was listed, that it will meet the bar of the federal agency that would be taking jurisdiction at that point. We've worked through this. We've attempted to do this several times. We've never gotten one yet to the finish line, but we're very optimistic that we can do that in Northeast Wyoming. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Committee, any questions of Director Budd in his current capacity, or all of his capacities? Got an expert in the room. Okay, thank you. Stay close. Director Bruce?
Mr. Chairman, Angie Bruce, Director of Game and Fish. Just want to second Bob's comments. I believe operators can do this now. However, this would put a little bit more clarity into the state statute and hopefully encourage more of them to. We currently work with a lot of proponents trying to push them this way because like the sponsor talked about, we do believe it's better for the bird if we can mitigate those impacts the closest to where they occur. So hopefully this will make it clearer and encourage more folks to look into that direction.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Seeing none. Interim Director Crowder, welcome. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason Crowder, Interim Director for the Office of State Lands and Investments. Really, I don't have too much more to provide other than answer some of the questions that we heard from the committee, that we do have rules in place. They are Chapter 29 of the Board of Land Commissioners Rules and Regulations. So I'm just representing that body who approves those mitigation banks and reviews them as they come forward. Obviously, we have very good experts who've been dealing with this species for quite some time and understand the needs and what's important for them to survive and thrive. And we rely on them as we go through our review process. It's really, our office gets involved in the financial component at the end. And it's after years of work that's been done to try to alleviate some of the pressures that development brings. So just happy to answer any questions based on that.
Thank you, Deputy Director. That is Interim Director Crowder, excuse me. Thank you. That is great. It does answer a question that came up earlier. And thank you for being here. We're good with that answer? Whoever brought it? Yep. Okay, great. Committee, any questions for these agency directors? Thank you all. Appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go right to the public now. Anyone else in the room that wants to comment on Senate File 179? Please come fill some chairs. Representative Provenza had a request to adjourn early, so maybe we'll get there. Maybe we won't. Ms. Johnson, please start with that note.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I am going to keep it short and just say we support it for all of the reasons that you heard beforehand. But I wanted to make sure that you were hearing from some of the sportsmen. We have a position sitting on the CIGIT through our executive director, and we just very much support this.
Appreciate that, Ms. Johnson. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau, sitting in favor of this bill. It might not seem like a big deal to a lot of people, but those lines, Section G, that you cannot use eminent domain, is important to my members. I like that this is voluntary, and I'm pretty sure I have some members that would be more than willing to participate in this program, so trying to keep it brief as well. Mr. Chairman, sitting in support. Take any questions you or the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Moline. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Moline, for that. Anyone else in the room that wants to comment on Senate File 179? No one online? Okay. With that, I'm going to close public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Representative Provenza, seconded by Representative Worf. Any further discussion or amendments on Senate File 179? Clean bill coming over. Ooh. Seeing none, question being called. This will be a roll call vote on Senate File 179. Thank you, Representative Provenza.
Mr. Chairman, there's a roll call vote for Senate File 179. Representative Campbell,
Aye.
Representative Connolly,
Aye.
Representative Harshman,
Excused.
Representative Jarvis,
Aye.
Representative Provenza,
Aye.
Representative Storer,
Aye.
Representative Thayer,
Aye.
Representative Wharf,
Aye.
Chairman Byron.
Aye.
Chairman, there are 8 aye and 1 excused.
Thank you. With that committee, we are adjourned and we will have, right now, we have a few more bills to hear on Thursday. And then remember, interim topics are due Friday. So let's expect to spend some time chatting about that Thursday if you don't have one to me by then.